My name is Sofia. I'm 34 years old, and the day my grandmother died I was sitting in the chair beside her bed holding her hand, which means I wasn't looking at my phone, which means I didn't see the message she had sent me 3 hours earlier from the adjoining room when she could still hold hers, a message with a video attached and a note that said for when you need it, my love. I saw it 4 weeks later, when Aunt Consuelo already had the ring. The ring was a platinum solitaire with a central diamond that my grandfather had commissioned in 1962 to propose to my grandmother in the garden of the house where she had grown up. My grandmother had described it to me so many times and in such detail that I could close my eyes and see it. The claw setting, the diamond with a small inclusion on the side that the jeweler had said was a defect but my grandfather had insisted was character. She had worn it for 60 years and in the last conversations we had, the ones during the months when we both knew she was saying goodbye to things even though neither of us named it directly, she had told me she wanted it to be mine, that she wanted me to wear it, that she wanted me to carry something of hers when I got married. My partner Lucio knew, my parents knew, my cousins knew because my grandmother had said it at more than one family dinner with the direct clarity of elderly people who have reached the point in their lives where saying what they think is more important than the discomfort it produces. Aunt Consuelo knew too, which didn't prevent her from opening my grandmother's jewelry box the morning after the funeral, taking all the pieces, putting them in her bag, and telling my mother when she asked that they were hers as the eldest daughter and that if anyone had something to say they should say it now. Nobody said anything, which was the result Consuelo had calculated. I didn't say anything either when my mother told me because it was too recent and I was too broken and because the loss of my grandmother was larger than any ring, and at that moment I didn't have the emotional resources to fight for anything. I went home, lay down, and didn't look at my phone for 3 days. When I did, I saw my grandmother's message. If someone you loved ever left and left behind something that belonged to you and someone else took it before you could defend it, subscribe to Unspoken Truth. Because this story is about what happens when an 82-year-old woman turns out to have been smarter than everyone who came after, and it is just getting started. My grandmother's name was Carmen de Montoya. She had been born in Seville in 1941, married my grandfather Eduardo at 21. They had 3 children, Consuelo the eldest, my mother Blanca the middle one, and Uncle Roberto the youngest. And she had spent the following 62 years being the center of gravity of a family that without her would have had much more difficulty remembering they were a family. She was the type of woman who does things well without needing anyone to notice, who remembers the birthdays of people no one else remembers, who cooks for 20 when 10 are expected because just in case, who listens genuinely when you talk to her and returns what you said weeks later in the exact context where it makes sense. She had arrived at 82 with all her clarity intact, and with the particular tranquility of someone who has lived enough to not need to prove anything to anyone. Her relationship with Consuelo was the relationship of a mother with her eldest daughter, which in the Reyes family meant something specific. Consuelo had grown up believing that being first gave her rights the others didn't have, rights my grandmother had never explicitly confirmed but hadn't sufficiently contradicted either, which over time had produced in Consuelo the comfortable certainty of someone who has been in a privileged position for so long they can no longer distinguish between privilege and right. My relationship with my grandmother was different from the one she had with the rest of the family, not because she loved me more than the others but because we understood each other in a way that required no explanation. I was the only one of her grandchildren who had lived near her throughout my adult life, who had spent Saturdays in her kitchen learning to make the things she made that no one else had bothered to learn, who had accompanied her to medical appointments when my mother couldn't, and who had been present in the ordinary moments and not just the extraordinary ones. Consuelo lived in Madrid, came to Seville for Christmas and important birthdays and situations that required it, which was a frequency she considered sufficient and that my grandmother had never questioned out loud, although she had commented on it privately with me with the honesty of people who no longer have time to waste being diplomatic. My grandmother began talking about the ring more frequently in the last year of her life, not morbidly but in the way people who are being honest with their own horizon talk about the things they want to make clear before they can no longer clarify them. She described it to me, told me the story of how my grandfather had commissioned it, talked about what it had meant to wear it for 60 years, and on several occasions in front of other people said directly that when she was gone she wanted it. To be mine. The last time she said it with witnesses was at a family lunch in August, for months before her death. It was my mother, Consuelo, two of my cousins and me. My grandmother raised the topic of the jewelry with the naturalness of someone who is 82 and has decided these conversations need to happen. She said the engagement ring was for Sofia, that she had decided this a long time ago, that Sofia had a partner she loved and that she wanted her to wear something of hers when she got married. Consuelo said, "Mamar, we'll see about that when the time comes," in the tone of someone postponing a conversation that doesn't suit them. My grandmother looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone who has registered exactly what she just heard and filed it in the right place, and changed the subject. She called me 3 days later, told me she had been thinking about that lunch and that she wanted to make sure I had something more than her word. She told me she was going to do something and that she didn't need me to do anything, just that when the moment came I should remember. I didn't ask her what she was going to do because I trusted her completely and because there was something in her voice that told me she knew exactly what she was doing. My grandmother had a rapid deterioration in October. What the doctors had described as a possibility became reality within 3 weeks. I spent that month going back and forth to the hospital. Consuelo came the second weekend and stayed for days. My mother was there every day. Uncle Roberto came the last weekend. The Thursday before my grandmother died, she was in one of her clearer phases. She had had better days and worse days, and that Thursday was a good day when she was completely present and completely herself. We spent the morning together talking about things that were ordinary and that were also goodbyes without being named as such. We talked about Lucia. We talked about the wedding we hadn't planned yet but that we both knew we wanted. We talked about the garden of her house and who was going to take care of the plants. At 1 in the afternoon a nurse came to do routine checks and I stepped into the hallway for a moment. When I came back my grandmother was looking at her phone with the concentration of someone doing something that requires attention. I asked what she was doing and she said she was sending a message. I said she needed help and she said no, that she knew how, and kept looking at the screen with that concentration. I let her do what she was doing because it was her phone and her message and because I had learned in 82 years of Carmen Reyes that when she said she knew how it was the truth. She died the following Sunday, peacefully, with my hand and my mother's. It was what it was and it will take time to stop being so. The morning after the funeral my mother went to my grandmother's house to begin organizing things. Consuelo was already there when she arrived, which required having left the hotel where she was staying early enough to suggest she had planned to arrive before everyone else. My mother told me that afternoon. She said when she arrived Consuelo was in the grandmother's bedroom with the jewelry box open. That when she asked what she was doing Consuelo said she was organizing Mamar's jewelry. That when my mother said they should wait until everyone was there Consuelo said they were hers as the eldest daughter and that if anyone had something to say they should say it now. My mother said nothing because she had just lost her mother and didn't have the energy or resources for that conflict at that moment, which was completely understandable and exactly what Consuelo had calculated. I didn't say anything either when my mother told me. I told her we'd talk about it when we were less raw, which was also true and was also that something in me had already decided that it wasn't going to be like that but needed time to know how. The following 3 days I was at home with Lucio processing grief with the slowness that grief requires when the person you've lost was central in your life. On the third afternoon Lucio asked if I wanted to see the messages that had arrived while I was at the hospital that week. I said yes, and she gave me the phone, and among the messages was my grandmother's from Thursday. It was a text message with a video attached and below a note that said for when you need it, my love, with a heart emoji she always used even if it took her 3 minutes to find it on the keyboard. I opened the video. I want to describe that video with the precision it deserves because it's important to understand it completely. It was my grandmother sitting in her hospital bed, Thursday at 1:15 in the afternoon according to the timestamp, wearing her blue nightgown with her hair combed because my grandmother never stopped combing her hair even in the hospital, looking at her phone's camera with the expression of someone completely in control of what they're doing. The angle was slightly crooked because she was holding it alone but the image was clear and the audio was clear and it was unmistakably her. She started by saying her full name, Carmen Reyes de Montoya. She said the date. She said she was in the hospital but that her head was completely clear as they would be able to verify. She said she wanted to make clear how she wanted her jewelry distributed because she had had a conversation in August that had made clear that if she didn't put it somewhere concrete there were going to be problems. Then she went piece by piece, every jewel in her jewelry box that she described from memory because she had known them for decades. She said the name of each piece, described what it looked like, said who she was leaving it to and why. The reasons were specific and personal and completely hers, not generic but considered. The why of each decision said out loud with the articulation of someone who has reflected on it and wants it to be clear. When she got to the engagement ring, she paused for a moment, described it, talked about my grandfather, talked about the 60 years, and then said, "This ring is for my granddaughter Sofia, because Sofia is the person in this family who has been truly present, not when it was convenient but always, because Sofia has a partner who loves her well and I want when they marry for them to carry something of mine. And because I say so and because it is my ring and it is my decision and no one else has anything to say about it." Up to that point I had been listening with the concentration of someone processing something important. Then came the part one didn't expect. After the ring, my grandmother looked at the camera for a silent moment, and then said, "Since I'm here, I'm going to take the opportunity to say some things I've been keeping quiet for too long because I thought it wasn't the moment, and it turns out that if it's not now, it's never going to be." And for the following 12 minutes my grandmother Carmen Reyes de Montoya, at 82 with all her clarity intact, said what she thought about each member of her family with the honesty of someone who has nothing left to lose by being diplomatic. I'm not going to reproduce everything she said because part of it was private and part of it was for people who would hear it themselves at the appropriate moment. What I can say is that it was the kind of truth that only someone who has observed a family for 60 years from the center can say, and who has decided that their last words in a video are going to be honest. She talked about Consuelo, talked about her relationship with privilege, talked about the conversation in August and the way Consuelo had said we'll see about that, said she had been watching for decades how Consuelo assumed that what belonged to everyone was hers and that she had tolerated that pattern for too long to avoid conflict, said that what she was leaving each person had been thought through and that Consuelo would receive what she had left her, which was a fair amount, and that their ring was Sofia's and that was that. She talked about my mother with tenderness and also with honesty about the ways my mother had been less present than she could have been, not with cruelty but with a direct love of someone who loves her daughter and tells her the truth. She talked about Uncle Roberto with genuine affection and an observation about his tendency to disappear in difficult moments that made Lucio laugh when I told her because it was perfectly accurate. And at the end she talked to me directly. She told me she knew I would hear it at the moment I needed it because that was what I did, that I always showed up when necessary, that the ring was mine because I had earned it in the only way things are really earned, by being present, and that if anyone disputed that they should play the video. She ended by saying, with a completely serene voice, "And now I'm going to turn this off before the battery runs out. God bless you, family." And she turned off the video. I called my attorney Mata the next day. I had inherited her from my father who used her for real estate matters and who described her as someone who didn't waste words or time. I sent her the video by secure email that same afternoon. She called me 2 hours later. She said, "Sofia, this is the best thing I've received in 12 years of practice." I asked her if it was sufficient. She told me that the admissibility of video wills in Spain had evolved significantly in recent years, that a video of these characteristics, with identification of the person, date, clear description of mental capacity, and specific expression of will regarding specific assets, was admissible as an expression of last will complementing a formal will, that it didn't replace a notarial will but that it had legal weight as evidence of intention and as an instrument for resolving disputes over specific assets not covered with sufficient detail in the formal will. I asked her if my grandmother's formal will mentioned the jewelry. She told me that according to the documents I had sent her, the formal will divided the estate in 3 equal parts among her 3 children but didn't specify the distribution of personal effects and jewelry, which was exactly the gap Consuelo had exploited and exactly the gap the video filled. I said, "When can we proceed?" Mater said, "Whenever you want." I told her I wanted a family meeting, that I wanted the video played in front of everyone, that I wanted Consuelo to hear it in the context where it should be heard. Mater asked if I was sure I wanted that format instead of a direct legal notification. I told her yes, that my grandmother had recorded that video to be played, and that was exactly what was going to happen. The meeting was on a Saturday in December at my parents' house, called by my mother under the pretext of a family lunch to discuss the outstanding inheritance matters. Consuelo arrived with her husband Aurelio. Uncle Roberto arrived with his partner. 2 of my cousins arrived. I arrived with Lucio and with Mater, who was introduced as the attorney helping with the inheritance procedures, which was true and wasn't everything. We ate, and when the plates were cleared, Mater stood up and said she had something to share with the family before they discussed outstanding matters. She took out her tablet, said she had received a video that Carmen Reyes de Montoya had sent to her granddaughter Sofia on the Thursday before her passing, and asked if she could play it. Consuelo frowned, said, "What video?" in the tone of someone who doesn't like the question but doesn't have a specific reason to object without seeing what it's about first. Mater played the video. I want to tell you what that room was like during the 19 minutes the video lasted, because I think it deserves to be described accurately. The first 3 minutes, while my grandmother identified the jewelry, the room was silent with the particular stillness of people processing something unexpected. Consuelo had the expression of someone who is starting to understand where this is going but hasn't fully arrived yet. Her hands were on the table and I saw them tense when my grandmother started talking about the ring. When my grandmother said the ring was for Sofia and gave her reasons, Consuelo opened her mouth and my mother put her hand on her arm with a gentle firmness that meant let her finish. Consuelo closed her mouth. When the part arrived where my grandmother said, "Since I'm here, I'm going to take the opportunity to say some things," Uncle Roberto let out a sound that was somewhere between surprise and suppressed laughter. One of my cousins covered her mouth with her hand. Lucio squeezed my hand under the table. The 12 minutes of my grandmother's honesty were heard by each person in that room with the specific expression of someone receiving what is theirs. When Consuelo's part arrived, Consuelo's hands on the table went completely white. Aurelio was looking at the opposite wall with the face of someone who would prefer to be somewhere else. When my mother's part arrived, I saw my mother nod very slightly with damp eyes. When Uncle Roberto's part arrived, he released the laughter he had been containing and said quietly, "She's completely right." When the video ended with the "God bless you, family," and the screen went dark, the room was silent for a moment that was long enough to be uncomfortable and necessary enough that no one interrupted it. Mater said, "I have advised the family on the legal admissibility of this video as an expression of the will of Carmen Reyes de Montoya regarding the distribution of her personal effects, specifically the jewelry, and I can confirm it has sufficient legal weight to constitute the basis of a formal claim on the engagement ring. I'll explain the available options." Consuelo interrupted, said, "That won't be necessary," in a voice that had lost the firmness with which she had said what was hers the morning after the funeral. She said, "I have it at home. I'll send it to Sofia this week." Mater said, "We appreciate the willingness. We'll document the agreement in writing so there is a record." Consuelo nodded without looking at anyone. My mother served coffee. The ring arrived by courier the following Wednesday in a small box with bubble wrap and no note. I took it out with hands that trembled slightly, not from nerves but from something more complicated than nerves. I held it for a moment. The claw setting, the diamond with the small inclusion on the side that the jeweler had said was a defect but my grandfather had insisted was character. I put it on the index finger of my right hand because it was the most similar to the finger where my grandmother had worn it and looked at it for a moment, thinking about her sitting in that hospital bed on Thursday at 1:15 with her phone, hair combed as always, doing what she had decided to do with the clarity of someone who knows exactly what they are doing. Then I called Lucia, who was at work, and told her I had something to show her when she got home. Lucio and I got married in May. It was in the garden of the house where my grandmother had grown up, which her heirs had put up for rent but whose tenant, an older man who had known my grandmother as a young woman, gave us for the afternoon at no charge when we explained what it was for. 20 people, spring sunshine, and me with my grandmother's ring on my right hand and my wedding ring on my left, and the particular certainty of someone carrying something that belonged to the right person and that reached their hands in the way it was meant to. My mother danced that night in a way I hadn't seen her dance in years. Uncle Roberto toasted Carmen with the open laughter my grandmother would have appreciated. Consuelo didn't come to the wedding, which didn't surprise me and which I received with the equanimity of someone who has closed what needed to be closed and needs nothing more than that. I think sometimes about my grandmother sitting in that hospital bed with her phone, looking for the heart emoji on the keyboard with the patience of an 82-year-old who has decided this is important and is going to do it even if it takes time. And I think about everything that video contained, the jewelry, the reasons, the 12 minutes of honesty that the whole family needed to hear and that only she could say, and I think she knew exactly what she was doing. She always did. If you have someone in your life who is already at that moment where goodbyes are near even though no one names them, I want to tell you something I learned from an 82-year-old woman who recorded a video on her hospital phone because she had had a conversation in August that had made clear that if she didn't put it somewhere concrete there were going to be problems. Important conversations need to exist somewhere more permanent than memory. Memory is selective and convenient, and people who want to rewrite what happened rely on that selectivity. Document the promises that matter to you, record the conversations that need to be remembered, keep the messages that say what someone wanted to tell you when they still could. Not because you distrust people but because time passes and memories adjust, and sometimes the only person who can defend what was real is a 19-minute video recorded by an 82-year-old woman in a hospital bed on a Thursday at 1:15 in the afternoon. And if you're on the other side, if you are the one at that moment, if you are the one who has things to say and wants to make sure they reach the right people in the right way, do it. Say what you have to say. Put it where someone will find it when they need it. Trust that the right person will know what to do with it. My grandmother trusted me and I showed up, as always, because that is what I do, and the ring is on my finger where she wanted it to be, and that is exactly what she wanted. My name is Sofia. I'm 34 years old. I got married in May in the garden of the house where my grandmother grew up, and I wear on my right hand a ring with a diamond that has a small inclusion on the side that the jeweler said was a defect, but my grandfather insisted was character. He was right. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself. And if no one has told you lately that showing up always is the most silent and most real way of earning something, I'm telling you now.